bus ride that night felt heavier than usual. It was almost midnight when I boarded, and the streets outside were nearly empty, glowing faintly under the sickly orange streetlights. Inside the bus, the silence pressed down on me, broken only by the low rumble of the engine. A few people sat scattered across the seats, but the one who caught my attention was sitting across the aisle, 3 rows away. A man in a long black coat who'd pulled low over his head. He didn't move. He didn't even shift. Just sat there, head slightly tilted downward, as though frozen in time. At first, I tried to dismiss it. People ride buses in all kinds of strange ways. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he was drunk. But the stillness gnawed at me. His hands rested flat on his knees, and not once did they twitch or fidget. Every few minutes, I stole glances his way, each time hoping to catch some small sign of life, blink, a shift in posture, anything. But no, he stayed the same. It was like staring at a statue, something that shouldn't have been alive, but somehow was. The first stop came and went. A businessman got off, the hiss of the doors filling the silence. The driver glanced in his mirror, then kept going. Another stop came. Another passenger stepped off. Each time the doors opened, I thought, surely this hooded man would move, but he never did. Stop after stop, the bus grew emptier, the rows of seats stretching out in eerie silence. The man in the black coat remained as he was, like he was waiting for something none of us could see. When a woman climbed aboard, I thought I'd feel safer. She sat a few rows ahead of the hooded man, setting her shopping bag down beside her. For a while, she seemed unaware of him. Then I noticed her glance back, her face tightening with unease. Without a word, she gathered her things and moved quickly to the front, closer to the driver. My stomach sank. It wasn't just me. She had felt it too. Something about him was wrong, deeply wrong. Eventually, it was just me, the driver, and the man in the coat. The quiet was unbearable. The bus creaked and groaned over the pavement, each sound amplified in the emptiness. I sat rigid, my eyes locked on the window, pretending not to notice him, but my heart pounded harder with every passing block. I thought about pulling the cord early, about walking the last stretch home. But the streets outside were dark, too empty, too dangerous in their own way. I stayed put, waiting for my stop, forcing myself not to look at him. Finally, my bell rang out, sharp in the silence. The driver slowed the bus, the doors opening with a loud hiss. Relief flooded through me. I was seconds away from stepping off. I stood, adjusted my backpack, and started down the aisle. That was when it happened. For the first time since I boarded, the hooded man moved. Slowly, almost painfully, he lifted his head. His face was pale. Not tired pale, not sick pale, not sick pale, like the color had been drained from his skin. His eyes were wide and glassy, fixed on me without a single blink. And then his lips began to curl, stretching into a thin, unsettling smile. It wasn't the kind of smile meant for another person. It was something hollow, something empty, as if he was smiling just for the sake of showing his teeth. My feet froze. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look away. Forcing myself forward, I stepped off the bus. The cold night air wrapped around me, and I tried to convince myself I was safe. But against my better judgment, I turned back. Through the glass window, under the dim interior light, I saw him. He was standing now, no longer hunched. He stood in the center of the aisle, who'd pushed back just enough to reveal his face, and that same twisted smile was still there. The bus doors closed with a final hiss, and the driver pulled away. I stood, rooted to the sidewalk, my breath sharp in the cool air. The man didn't move, didn't sit back down. He stayed there, watching me. Even as the bus shrank into the distance, his face was still visible in the window, his eyes locked onto mine. The farther the bus went, the smaller he became, but the image of him only grew larger in my mind. For a second, I thought about chasing the bus, maybe telling the driver something, But what would I say? That a passenger had looked at me, that he smiled. It sounded ridiculous, like paranoia. Nobody would believe it. So I stood there, gripping my backpack tighter, my pulse still racing. A heavy pit formed in my stomach, a certainty I couldn't shake. This wasn't just a man. Whatever he was, something about him wasn't right. I walked the rest of the way home, every sound chasing me. The crunch of leaves under my shoes echoed too loudly. The whisper of the wind through the trees made me flinch. Every few steps, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see him stepping off a bus that wasn't even there. But the street was empty, stretching endlessly into the dark. Still, the sensation of being followed clung to me like a shadow. By the time I reached my house, I slammed the door shut, locking it twice. My chest heaved as I leaned against it, whispering to myself that I was safe now. But the thought wouldn't leave me. What if he had gotten off at the next stop? What if he was still out there, walking these same streets? What if, even now, he was closer than I realized? The smile on his face replayed in my head, each time sharper, more haunting. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the floorboards, every sway of the branches outside my window made me snap awake. At one point, I swore I saw a figure outside, tall and motionless by the streetlight. I shut the curtain quickly, refusing to look again. My mind kept returning to his pale face, his stillness, his unnatural grin. No matter how I tried, I couldn't push it away. The morning light should have eased my fear, but it didn't. The memory followed me like a shadow. It's been years since that night, but I still avoid late buses. I have no choice. I sit near the driver, never in the middle or the back, because I know what it feels like to be trapped, to be watched by something that doesn't seem human. And I know I'll never forget the way he smiled at me as the bus carried him away into the dark. It was a late winter night, and I had just finished studying at the library. The campus was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound echo. I caught the last bus heading back to my apartment, and as soon as I stepped inside, I realized it was almost empty. Only one other passenger sat in the back corner. He wore a black suit with a tie, his hands folded neatly on his lap. He didn't move or even acknowledge me as I walked past him. His stillness was strange, but I convinced myself it was nothing. I chose a seat a few rows ahead, close enough to the middle, but not near him. His puss jolted forward, and I settled in, pulling out my phone to scroll through messages. The ride was quiet, except for the low hum of the engine. At some point, I glanced back over my shoulder. The man in the suit hadn't changed position. He was sitting perfectly upright, his gaze fixed out the window at the passing darkness. I thought maybe he was just lost in thought, but something about the way he held himself didn't feel right. The bus made its first stop. The driver opened the doors with a loud hiss and waited, but no one stepped on. He frowned, glanced in the mirror, then closed the doors and continued driving. I thought it was odd, but I didn't say anything. The silence in the bus stretched on, growing heavier. I checked my phone again, only to realize I was holding it tighter than I should have. I told myself to relax, but deep down, I knew something was strange about the whole situation. At the next stop, the same thing happened. The doors opened, the cold night air rushing inside, but nobody entered. The driver muttered something under his breath, shaking his head as he shut the doors again. I looked back at the man in the suit. He hadn't moved at all. Not a blink, not a shift of his head, not even the smallest motion in his hands. It was like he was frozen. The air in the bus felt heavy, pressing down on me in a way I couldn't explain. The longer I sat there, the more unsettled I felt. I opened my phone, the glow lighting my face. For a moment, I glanced at the reflection in the dark bus window beside me. My heart skipped a beat. The reflection showed my seat, the row behind me, the entire section of the bus completely empty. But in reality, I knew there was someone sitting there. I whipped my head back to check, and there he was, The suited man in the same stiff position as before. My stomach twisted into knots. Something wasn't right. I forced myself to sit still, pretending nothing was wrong, but my hands were trembling. Every instinct told me to get up, to sit closer to the driver, but I didn't want to draw attention. What if the man noticed me moving? I stared out the window, but I couldn't focus. The reflection in my phone had burned itself into my mind. There was no denying it according to the reflection. He wasn't really there. And yet, when I looked directly, I saw him. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up my bag, walked quickly down the aisle, and sat in a seat right behind the driver. The driver glanced at me through the mirror, but didn't say a word. My pulse was racing, my skin cold and clammy. I didn't dare turn around, terrified of what I might see. For the rest of the ride, I sat rigid, staring at the back of the driver's head, listening to the steady hum of the bus. Every second felt stretched, like I was trapped in some strange dream. When the bus slowed at another stop, I braced myself. The doors opened, and again, no one entered. This time, the driver muttered, clearer than before, "Strange, keeps happening." His voice was low, like he didn't want me to hear. But I did, and it made my blood run cold. He knew something was wrong too. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but my throat was too tight to speak. The thought of saying it aloud, of acknowledging the man in the back, felt dangerous. The ride dragged on until finally my stop approached. I gathered my courage and risked a quick glance over my shoulder. My heart lurched into my throat. The seat in the back was empty, completely empty. The man in the suit was gone, okay? No movement, no sound, no sign of him getting off, okay? Just vanished, as if he had never been there in the first place. I stared, unable to breathe, my mind spinning. I turned back toward the driver, my mouth opening to say something, but he spoke first. His eyes flicked up to the mirror, scanning the empty bus. Then he muttered, almost to himself, "Happens every few weeks. Always the same." My body went cold. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even confused. This wasn't the first time. My stomach twisted in fear, realizing this wasn't just my imagination. Others had seen him too. The doors opened with a final hiss, and I stumbled off the bus. The cold night air hit me hard, but it wasn't refreshing. It felt sharp, like knives against my skin. I stood there on the sidewalk, my heart still pounding as the bus pulled away. I couldn't shake the image of the suited man's still body, his blank stare, the way he never moved. My hands shook so badly, I had to shove them into my pockets to hide it. Okay. I felt exposed, like he could still see me somehow. Walking home, the streets felt emptier than ever. Every shadow stretched long across the pavement. The echo of my footsteps sounded wrong, like there was a second set, just slightly behind me. I turned around again and again, but there was no one. The fear settled into my chest, heavier with every step. I kept picturing that reflection, how the seat had been empty even while I swore he was sitting there. That night, I hardly slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something to happen. At one point, I swore I heard the faint hiss of bus doors opening outside my window, but when I looked, the street was empty. The silence afterward was worse than any sound. I crawled back into bed, heart hammering, pulling the blanket up over my face like a child hiding from monsters. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just fatigue, maybe a trick of the light, maybe my imagination playing with me after a long day. But even now, I know that's not true. That man was there. I saw him. I felt his presence, and yet, somehow, he wasn't. The reflection had told me the truth, even when my eyes refused to believe it. That thought is what haunts me the most. I still take the bus sometimes, but never late at night. Never alone. And if I ever catch sight of someone sitting too still, staring out a window with no sign of life, I don't sit near them. I don't even look too long, because I've learned something from that night. Sometimes the people you see on a bus aren't people at all. The night had been long, and after finishing my late shift at the hospital, all I wanted was to get home and collapse into bed. It was just past 1 in the morning when I climbed onto the last bus of the night. The streets outside were silent, not a single car in sight. Usually, the bus was empty at this hour, but that night, I wasn't alone. At the very back sat a young girl, about my age, her head lowered as though she were exhausted. She clutched a backpack tightly against her chest. I took a seat near the middle, closer to the front, but my eyes kept drifting back toward her. Hair was messy, strands hanging into her face, and her skin looked pale, almost gray, under the flickering fluorescent lights. I thought maybe she was just a tired student heading home after a long night. Still, something about her posture unsettled me. She hadn't moved since I got on, not even to adjust the bag she was holding. As the bus rolled forward, the silence became suffocating. The driver hummed quietly to himself, the only sound breaking through the dull roar of the engine. I tried to distract myself by scrolling on my phone, but I couldn't resist glancing back again. That time, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Her head was angled slightly, just enough to make it look like she was watching me. I shook the thought away, but unease crept deeper into my chest. The bus hit a bump in the road, jolting me in my seat. Her backpack slipped from her arms and landed in the aisle with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the empty bus, startling me, but she didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look down at it. She just sat there, motionless, with her head still lowered. My throat went dry as I stared at the bag lying in the middle of the floor, untouched. I leaned forward slightly, whispering toward the driver. "Hey, do you know that girl sitting back there?" "Okay." He glanced up at the rearview mirror, then back at me with a confused expression. "What girl?" My blood ran cold. I turned in my seat, heart hammering, and my stomach dropped. The back row was empty, completely empty. No pale girl, no one holding a backpack. Just rows of vacant seats stretching into the shadows. But the backpack was still there. It lay in the aisle, silent and solid, proof that someone or something had been sitting there. I gripped the edge of my seat, my fingers numb, unsure what to do. My instincts screamed at me to get closer, to see for myself, but I couldn't make my legs move. The driver kept his eyes fixed on the road, his jaw tight. It was as if he knew better than to ask questions. I sat frozen, staring at the bag. Every second felt stretched, unbearable. The sound of the engine seemed to fade as my focus locked onto that object. I thought about calling out, about asking the driver to stop the bus and let me off early, but I was too afraid to speak. My skin crawled, and a cold sweat dripped down my back. I couldn't stop thinking about her pale face, her lowered head, and how she had been angled toward me. The bus rattled on, each passing streetlight casting flickering shadows across the interior. My eyes kept darting between the empty seat and the abandoned backpack. At one point, I thought I saw a movement to shadow, shifting across the aisle. But when I blinked, there was nothing. Just the bag, lying perfectly still, waiting. The longer I stared at it, the heavier the air seemed to become, pressing down on my chest. Finally, the bus slowed. We had reached the last stop at the edge of town. The driver parked, the brakes hissing loudly in the stillness. I exhaled, relief flooding me, though my heart still pounded. He stood up, stretching, then turned to glance at the empty bus. That's when his face drained of color. His eyes locked on the aisle. I followed his gaze. The backpack was gone. The space where it had been was empty, as though it had never existed. My skin prickled, my throat tightening. I jumped from my seat, rushing toward the door. The driver didn't say a word. Hi. She just stared into the empty bus, his face pale and stiff. I stumbled out onto the sidewalk, gasping for air. The night was cold, but it felt safer than being inside. The bus pulled away. I turned back, half expecting to see her face in the window. For a second, I swore I did. A pale outline of a girl with messy hair, pressed against the glass, watching me. But in the blink of an eye, it was gone. The bus rumbled down the street, its red taillights shrinking until they disappeared into the dark. I stood frozen, my pulse still hammering in my ears. The walk home felt endless. Every step echoed against the pavement. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, reaching for me with every movement. I kept turning my head, convinced I'd see someone following. Each time, the street was empty. Still, the image of that girl wouldn't leave me. Her stillness, her lowered head, that backpack, couldn't shake the feeling that she was still close. When I finally reached home, I locked the door tight and sat on the couch, trembling. The silence inside my apartment felt almost as suffocating as the bus. I tried to convince myself it had been some strange hallucination brought on by exhaustion, but the memory of that heavy backpack hitting the floor was too real. I heard it. I saw it. And the way it disappeared was impossible to explain. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me jump, and every shadow felt alive. At one point, I thought I heard the faint sound of something being dragged across the floor outside my room. But when I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I shut it quickly, refusing to look again. I knew I wouldn't find anything, and that was the part that terrified me most. To this day, I avoid that route. If I see that bus coming, I walk, no matter how long it takes, 'cause I'll never forget the sight of her sitting in the back, clutching that bag. And I'll never forget the way it just vanished. It taught me something I didn't want to learn. Not every passenger who boards a bus is really there. Some of them are still riding, even when they shouldn't be.